if I'll say a few words about my past and how I got into this.
Yes.
And I'll be using the language of what we call the divine proportion, which is kind of an old way of expressing the golden mean, golden ratio, golden section. Because basically when you have, with the golden ratio, when it repeats, it's the simple way of taking a line, cutting it so that you immediately get proportion. There's no other way that you can take a magnitude, cut it, so that the whole is to the longer as the longer is to the shorter. In fact, it's one of the mysteries of Plato that he introduces in the Republic when he says, take a line, cut it unevenly, and then he asks you to cut those portions in the same ratios. The big mystery that Plato would speak about, not only when he would recount in the Timaeus the certain principles that were oftentimes veiled, but he talked about the greater and the lesser, and Aristotle called it the indefinite dyad. There was a big mystery. It was clear that Plato did get it from the Pythagoreans, and then was also an initiate, like Pythagoras, of the Egyptian mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, and probably the Samothracian mysteries as well. But it was forbidden to reveal the content, as you know, on penalty of death.
Capital punishment.
And Hippasus is the one who actually revealed the structure of the dodecahedron, because to do that, if you're going to explain the dodecahedron, which has 12 faces, each is a pentagon. Anytime you have a pentagon, you have a pentagram. Anytime you have that structure, you have golden ratios. And that was the biggie. They were at least smart enough to know that there is a golden numbering system. Even though they had to approach it through side and diagonal numbers, they nevertheless knew that there was this great mystery behind all of existence. And it was encoded into the greater and the lesser. And the big mystery, just to put it in a nutshell, what I found was it's nothing other than the two solutions to the equation that gives us the golden mean.
A simple quadratic equation.
And they're reciprocals of each other. And the interesting thing is the greater is going to turn out to be 1.6180339 on to infinity. The lesser, which you and I agree in terms of our equations is the way to go in terms of your bijection formula and in physics, is the lesser would be the exact same number minus 1. It'd be 0.6180339. And of course, the formula is square root of 5 plus or minus 1 divided by 2. So if you add 1, you get the greater. If you subtract 1, you're going to get the lesser, at least in the formula. What's interesting beyond that is that the one, unity, occupies a geometric mean position between the two. So furthermore, if you subtract the lesser from the greater, you come back to unity. And obviously, anytime you take something that's reciprocal, you multiply them. Any number will do that, you'll get 1. But no other number allows you to do that subtraction and get back to unity. So the 1 and the indefinite dyad, greater and lesser, becomes one of the great mysteries of Plato's teaching. And those of us who are interested in non-ordinary states of consciousness, which Plato implies in he does the sun analogy, where the good is related to the sun in the Republic. And these were scrolls. And it's now been determined that if you do a certain type of counting mechanism based on some of the Homeric stories, it's called stichometry. And so you have a scroll. And what Plato did, even though he couldn't give you the secret of the golden section, he put it smack dab where the one and the good, or the one and the sun, creates an analogy, a relationship, a ratio. And then what he does is right after that, roughly the same spot at the golden cut, he says, take a line, cut it unevenly, and then you cut those portions again, and so you get his upper intelligible realm, his lower sensible realm, world of forms, then there's the mysterious level of mathematicals, then ordinary objects of this world, and then the shadows on the wall, what would be distorted and are misused by politicians and advertising and that whole thing. However, when you go into illumination, you realize that these are reflections really of the everyday objects. At least you become aware of the golden mean permeating all levels, all of them. So then after the one that's divided into two, now divided into four, you come to the cave. The prisoner is watching the shadows on the wall. One of them turns around, notices a fire, notices the puppeteers with their cardboard cutouts or whatever they are casting the shadows. It's all a sequence of leaps of consciousness through a series, now divided into 8. So it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, all the even numbers. Geometric means involved. Of course, Plato gives us the lambda, 1, 2, 4, 8, and 1, 3, 9, 27, where each number is the geometric mean between its associated numbers, but there's a deeper one that involves the incommensurable numbers, and that's the golden mean in its relationship to unity. So the prisoner comes out of the cave and makes this series of steps, ultimately to the summit of the cave, where the indefinite dyad, the greater and the lesser, are playing a role in the existence of everything, including Fibonacci numbers, even more primitive Lucas numbers, and then the root 2, root 3, root 5, golden means infused into nature, etc. But when you get to the summit of the cave, there's a climactic experience that can happen that the yogis tell you about, and it's called samadhi. And samadhi is cosmic consciousness, where there's an experience of omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, incredible light, and you go into a state of bliss or ecstasy. But there's even a stage beyond that goes beyond the one, that gets right into the nitty-gritty of the things you've discovered. You move into total non-dualism. The ego drops off, and you go into states of infinity, but all is love. The whole thing is ruled by love. But you have to give up, you have to die to the lower self to experience it. It's really the hero's journey. And so that's all tied in with all the things that I've been working on. And that's why I feel so, what should I say, inspired by your work and work that is consistent with this. So some of the people that, as you mentioned, there are people that are really important to you. I'll just give a few names if it's acceptable. First ones I want to mention are Clarion and Eileen Olsen, my parents. My father was like a saint. My mother was like an angel. Didn't realize it early on. There was a lot of conflict. In fact, I left home, but eventually I realized just how special he was. He actually was a minister, and I kind of chafed under the what I considered a bit of dogmatism of a certain approach in religion. You know, I now teach comparative religion. He became more radical than me in terms of respecting all religions. He would have his Quran. He would study Buddhism. We both came to an agreement that there's beauty in all religions, but they all have problems as well. That's at least my opinion on it. Where they get dogmatic, that's where you get the problem. Dr. Douglas Baker here in England. In fact, for a while, I came here to Birkbeck to do my master's degree, and then I did research for Douglas Baker. So
I was David Bohm.
Yeah. Yes, and so while I was here, another very important person was David Bohm, who at the time, unbeknownst to me, he was working with Krishnamurti, who had also come through the Theosophical movement. He and Basil Hiley, who was kind of an associate that I've kept my relationship with Basil, gave him my Golden Section book. In fact, the last time I was in London. But the reason I got to know David Bohm was because of John Hastett, the chairman of the Department of Physics. And the reason I got to know him was while I was doing my philosophy degree at Birkbeck, where I specialized in Plato, Aristotle, and philosophy of science. I went to see Hasted because I was interested in paranormal phenomena, parapsychology, because I'd had my own experiences and I was convinced, like William James, that these were the anomalies, the puzzles that would lead to a deeper comprehension of what human consciousness is really like and what the human being's capacity was. And I was shocked because at Birkbeck, that's what they were doing. And Bohm was a part of it. They were doing all of these experiments with telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition. I even did my own. They had me studying me because I had shown some mild psychokinetic abilities and so forth. But anyway, he said, you must meet Bohm, you must study with him. And he was phenomenal. I realized right away what kind of genius thinker. The same thing that happened when I first met you. There's a certain quality to people like yourselves where you're not stuck in a particular paradigm. You're looking for the truth. And because of that, you search and you're seekers. You will not stop until you have found the truth, the beauty, and the goodness that is present in the world. And I found that with David Bohm. I first came across the golden section at the University of Minnesota. I'd always been involved with studying of nature. Grew up on a farm where we had something like 200,000 Christmas trees that we planted by hand, apple orchards, everything. Horses were the first thing that when I first was a child, that I realized that there's the beauty that I was attracted to. I realized, oh my God, this world through the horse was the first thing that I, came to appreciate. But then at University of Minnesota, I met Dan Pedo, who was a geometer, an artist, and an author. And he did an honors course on mathematics and art. And that's where I first had my entree, did a summa thesis on Platonic aesthetics as a result in the philosophy department. And so other people that were really big instrumental individuals on my path were Keith Critchlow and John Michel here in the UK. They did sacred geometry, which again was anathema to certain people who just thought, oh, that's flaky, that's nonsense. I would beg to differ. Also, Robert Lawler became extremely important, who wrote really kind of the first book on sacred geometry. Robert Paul Sr. and Robert Paul Jr. And then I came across Houston Smith, the kind of the granddaddy of the study of comparative religion. Did a course with him at Berkeley, and then he and I became very close friends. And he's written the foreword to my next book, Divine Proportion, the Mathematical Perfection of the Universe. And a lot of your material is going to be in that book, just so you know. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, we became friends, the sixth man to walk on the moon, went into samadhi, went into cosmic consciousness on the way back from the moon, also conducted successful telepathy experiments while he was on the lunar module, came back, started the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Though I only know them somewhat tangentially, but they've been a big influence, Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, in their view of microtubules in their search for quantum computation. And there again, with the microtubules, they're not only in the neurons, but they're in the cells of the body. They're in all the mammals, and they're in most plants. Everything is resonating to this harmonics. We go into resonance with the plants, animals. That's probably the explanation for all the psi phenomena. We go into resonance with one another. We die to the lower self. We re-identify with higher states of consciousness, all the way up to these potential states of Buddhahood, whatever the heck one wants to call it. So those were people that were kind of crucial in my life. That's good enough there.